Ted Morton is a PC candidate for leadership, and he joins me now to talk about the issues. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Steve.
How would you differentiate yourself from the other candidates?
Well, on a number of scores, but I think the two main ones are I've speaking up and have a long track record of speaking up for strengthening Alberta as a province within Confederation, and specifically in terms of taking greater control of policy areas that could be and should be inside provincial jurisdiction, and also on the question of transfers and equalization payments that go to Ottawa. I think the second area where I'm quite different from the other candidates is on the issue of democratic reform, both reforms within the party or within our own party, and also the types of reforms that I would make to the legislative and the governing process in Edmonton.
Okay. On the topic of equalization, I know that you have proposed not to increase the amount of equalization payments that are going to Ottawa. Would you ever consider decreasing the amount of payments that are going to Ottawa?
Well, that'd be great. I'm not sure what the prospects for that are, but the key thing here, Steve, is that the amount of money leaving this province every year in equalization and transfers is just growing exponentially. 2 years ago it was $9 billion, last year it was $12 billion, this year it's going to be $14 or $15 billion. Alberta simply will not be able to build the infrastructure we need to accommodate all the Canadians that are moving here from other parts of the country. They're not bringing their schools or their water treatment plants and their streets and hospitals. None of that infrastructure, we have to build that,
Right.
and it's expensive. And so Alberta simply will not be able to handle the influx of people if every time we do better, Ottawa takes more.
You mentioned earlier your second point was democratic reform. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that point.
Yeah, I think I am the candidate that is most clearly the candidate of change, and our party needs change. We received 200,000 fewer votes in the last election in 2004 than we did in 2001. And half of those people stayed home, and the other half voted for a new party and a new conservative party. So for the first time in our party's history, we're competing with another conservative party. And I think the next leader of our party has to have a plan to reunite all conservatives back into a single party, because everybody in Canada, whether you're in Ontario or BC or Atlantic Canada, everybody knows that when conservatives split their vote, bad things happen. Liberals and the NDP get in and wreck the economy. So I think the key to rebuilding the party is to do something that we've forgotten to do for the last decade, the decade I've been active in the party. The party doesn't listen to its members anymore. We've become, despite all the rhetoric about a populism, listening and listening, our leadership has not listened to membership for the last decade. And so I've committed to giving conservatives a reason to come back in the party, and specifically to do that by giving them a direct role in framing party policy. The policy convention producing a policy book, the way Preston Manning built the Reform Party in the 90s, and significantly the way Stephen Harper built the new Conservative Party, growing out of that great policy conference in Montreal in March of 2005. This is the way to reconnect the members with the party and to attract people back in. So that's the in-house part of democratic reform.
Certainly a renewal.
Renewal, exactly. Renewal and reform, and then, but we can't stop there. We have to then also walk into Edmonton and say, we're going to make the governance of Alberta the most transparent, the most accountable, the most efficient in Canada. We have to become the champions. We, the party, and the next premier of this province, has to be the champion of democratic reform. After sponsorship scandal in Quebec and the Gomery, Albertans are just as tired of dishonest government and government that tries to hide what they're doing. Albertans are tired of that too. And so I'm saying I've committed to things like fixed election dates, term limits for premiers, a much stronger Auditor General, I'd like to have Alberta have a great auditor general like Sheila Fraser has been in Ottawa. Less expensive, less onerous access to information. Those types of reforms, a lobbyist registry. Alberta is one of the few provinces, the big provinces that don't have a lobbyist registry.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we have to become the champions of that. And a lot of the other candidates have copied my policy in that regard. But for them, they've kind of gotten the religion recently. And of course, I've been working for over a decade with people like Preston Manning and Stockwell Day and Stephen Harper on those types of reforms at the federal level. So I think I have a track record of working for reform that the other candidates don't have.
Okay. And now you were one of the so-called the authors of the so-called firewall letter. That's
the Alberta,
famous.
The Alberta Agenda Letter,
the
AKA the firewall letter. Right.
Right. I guess people in where I'm from in Ontario might know it as the firewall letter due to our media, which instructs us on those issues. But the Alberta Agenda Letter, you outlined that perhaps policy issues such as provincial police akin to the OPP in Ontario, and perhaps having an Alberta pension plan like they do in Quebec, having a Quebec pension plan, that is something that you want to bring forward to Alberta if you were to get a mandate.
That's right. That's right. It actually shouldn't be. It should be more scary to Albertans than it is to people in Ontario and Quebec, because basically what the Alberta agenda is saying, look, Alberta is now a top-tier province like Ontario and Quebec. Historically, Canada has always unofficially operated on two levels. There's Quebec and Ontario, the top-tier provinces, and everybody else. Today, given our financial contribution and our financial growth, and particularly our key role in energy, Alberta is a top-tier province, maybe top-tier plus from an economic point of view. So we're simply saying that Alberta should conduct itself accordingly, which is to say do a lot of the things that Ontario and Quebec already do, like provincial policing. Both Ontario and Quebec do that. Like a provincial pension plan, like Quebec already does. More control over health care, like Quebec. Quebec has more private health care than the rest of the country put together.
Yeah.
Use the notwithstanding clause when the Supreme Court tries to barge in and reshape or strike down provincial policy. Again, Quebec is the only province that ever seems to use the notwithstanding clause. Take control of immigration. We have pretty significant labor shortages here in terms of skilled tradesmen. Quebec has taken control of their immigration because they want francophones. Alberta has the option, and as Premier I would use it, for taking control of our immigration and to bring in the kind of skilled tradesmen that our economy requires right now. So those are all ways of Alberta basically taking greater control of the policies that affect Albertans, sort of taking control of our destiny, and it all is within the framework of the existing Constitution. And most of it's done already by either Ontario or Quebec, so it shouldn't be that alarming to anybody.
Okay, so it wouldn't be said that you're trying to seek more autonomy for the province of Alberta, but you're trying to rebalance the commitments under the Constitution to be more focused on a more provincialist point of view. Would you say that?
Well, that makes it sound like sort of an inward-looking thrust. I see it as Alberta really emerging on the Canadian scene, as I said before, as one of the top three provinces, and realistically BC too. I am absolutely convinced that in the 21st century, Canada's prosperity will be linked very, very closely to the prosperity of the three western provinces, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And initially, right now, that's being driven primarily, and certainly in Alberta, but in the other two provinces too, by hydrocarbons, by oil and gas and oil sands. But there are other things there: uranium, solar, wind, and we need, the next premier of our province has to be able not just to persuade Albertans, but to persuade leaders in Ottawa and other premiers that when Alberta and the other western provinces do well, it doesn't hurt Quebec or it doesn't hurt Ontario. If Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan do well, it helps all Canadians, because what we're doing is creating, not just creating wealth, we're creating jobs. Mm-hmm. And I think if Canada is going to be competitive and prosperous in the 21st century, Central and Eastern Canada has to celebrate and support the growth and expansion of the Western economies, not always be grabbing to take more in equalization and transfers, and sending it back to Central and Eastern Canada to keep people where there isn't enough work. It's not only bad for us, it's bad for the country, and that's what the Alberta agenda is about. It's not just an Alberta agenda, it's a BC and Saskatchewan agenda, but I think it's an Ontario and Quebec agenda too.
Okay. I have a question here. There's no sales tax, as we know, in the province of Alberta, and you have some of the lowest income tax in Canada. Would one of the things that you might consider to rebalance the economy would be to eliminate provincial income tax?
That's not a short-term goal of mine. Our party has, as a medium-term goal, to keep pushing the corporate or business taxes down to 8% as a tool of economic diversification, and I'm still committed to doing that. But what we have to be careful about, well, two things. One, we want to be competitive, not just with other provinces, but the 50 U.S. states, and well, competitive globally as well, in terms of the combined effect of our business and personal income tax. So I have committed to make sure that the combined rate of those taxes will make us globally competitive, not just competitive within Canada. But having said that, it's also imperative that we not fund ongoing program expenses like education and health and infrastructure off of energy revenues, because our energy revenues fluctuate. And that's how Alberta got into big trouble in the late 80s and early 90s, is that we built up some big spending programs that were being financed basically by resource revenues, and when the price dropped and production dropped, we fell into deficit and in debt. Ted Morton will not lead Alberta down that path.
Okay, well, with that, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and Dr. Ted Morton.
Okay, thank you.
Great speaking to you.
Yeah.